All right, tonight, everybody, welcome. And today we're going to talk about nervous system regulation. And really, if you have an overstimulated nervous system, if you learn to actually control it and relax your nervous system, you can create a new identity. So you can let go of some old stories, old patterns. And really, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's get started. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining my conversation or listening to it on replay. Today, I'm going to show you actually a couple of things, and I'd love to start tonight with a question. And the question is this. You might have heard this often into like intermedia or various places, right? Or even as a child. Time heal all wounds. And I want you just to put a type of one into the chat or think about it, and or two if you disagree. Yeah, so a little bit of both. Typically, in my responses, a lot of ones, right? A lot of ones. People often agree with this story, like time heals all wounds. After time, things kind of go away, right? However, I want to answer that question with a question. And got a glass of water here, and I just have a question, and that is, how heavy is this glass of water? Yeah, you might get, say, 12 ounces, half a pound, maybe three-quarters of a kilogram, right? 250 milliliters, whatever, your story is about that, right? Lots of different guesses. But really, it's really just depends. Depends how long I hold on to this water, right? If I just take the water and drink it, obviously not too heavy, but if I ask you to hold it for 10 minutes, yeah, it's going to get heavier. If I ask you to hold for a week, well, it's going to be even heavier. Now think if you have to hold it for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. Well, right. Obviously going to be a lot heavier. And that's really what's happening to our bodies. We create a story, something happens in our childhood, a wound, maybe a trauma of some sort, and we've been carrying this around for decades. And obviously it starts to wear on us, just like it would a glass of water. And just if you even think of your own childhood or your own life, if you think back to your childhood, just do you remember having any feelings of being hurt? Maybe your mom yelled at you for doing something. Maybe you got into some trouble with your dad and he started to yell. Maybe it was simply like you didn't feel seen or heard because you had an older brother, or that was maybe the time period where you kids were seen and not heard. Maybe it was a simple thing like that you remember back, like maybe a death of a family member, someone that was close to you. And if you think back, how does that make you feel? You still remember the story, and maybe you feel that maybe it makes you feel heavy inside, or you feel a sensation, a density. Maybe you're holding on to something, right? And that's what happens inside our body. And so I'm going to ask again, do you remember? Do you want to change your answer? Does time heal all wounds? Right. So more people at this point will start to say two, right? Time doesn't heal. You might forget about the story and maybe uh maybe you try to think about it for logically as an adult, but realistically you haven't forgotten it. And the thing is your body hasn't forgotten it. And I'm going to show you that today. We're going to take you through an exercise. Before I actually go any further, you take a moment. We'll grab a pen and paper. It'll be useful a little bit in our session. So I'll give you a moment there. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of our session. All right. So I'm going to have another question here. So let me ask you, what if you can actually learn to see or notice in your mind and body what is keeping you in this cycle of feeling pain, feeling hurt, feeling stuck or being stuck in something. And that pain doesn't have to be a physical pain. It could be an emotional pain. Maybe you remember, your grandmother dying that you're close to. Maybe it was your dad saying something to you and you made a story or created a pattern about it. Whatever that might be, uh, do you remember? And what if you realized what's gone on in the last, decade, 2 decades, is that it's not really your body betraying you, but it's actually your nervous system protecting you. And the only way it knows how. And what if I can show you? that when you start to think about it, we can learn to let it go by noticing when your body starts to collapse. Maybe it'll dissociate from the sensation or feeling. You might get heavy or dense. Maybe your body goes quiet or you start to numb yourself out. Maybe you disappear, or you go into a fight or flight situation. And really what's happening is you're going to survival mode. So what if you can learn to let it go and finally heal, not just for a time period, but forever? What would that mean to you? Right? So a little bit about my journey. Uh, Obviously, I was in a car accident. Obviously, this actually isn't my car. Not that it's obvious. This wasn't the car accident that I was in. Uh, but it was a photo that I had. I was in a serious car accident and I almost died. I was 13. And it was actually in that moment that I realized that I wanted to help people. And I didn't really know how that looked as I got older, but I knew I wanted to. And I went to university, or actually in high school. I knew that like I love two things. I love sports and science. So I took a degree, a program in exercise science with this desire to continuing on. I didn't know what that looked like, whether that was medicine or pharmacy or physical therapy or physiotherapy in Canada, physical therapy in the States, or I wasn't really sure. And so I went to school, university, and in university I had a really awesome professor. And not only that, I went to a small school in northern Michigan. I had classes of like seven, 11 students in some of my more like program directive classes. And it was amazing. So I had a lot of one-on-one time with the professor, and he was a sports psychologist by training. So we really got into like the mind in sports. So we talked about like how professional athletes were using visualization professionally, and this is not to date myself in the 90s. Back then, golfers, basketball players, baseball pitchers were already using visualization in their sport to, you know, better their sport or better themselves. And so, you know, I found that fascinating, and it really got me into even studying the mind. So I got a minor in psychology because I love the body, but that really changed my how my perspective was on like the body. We also talked to like placebo and how, you know, how effective the placebo is, that they have to try to mask that, and just the benefits of the overall body in general, how exercise, you know, the benefits of exercise and a lot of, you know, the benefits of the human body. So uh I just this philosophy, obviously, with the natural ability of the body. And my mom was seeing a chiropractor at the time, and she recommended like I should go talk to him because it really matched my philosophy. And so I did, and I talked to him, and I just fell in love with chiropractic. So, you know, went to the computer lab and, you know, dialed up the internet back then, like right, and and so I got on and researched chiropractic, and yeah, I picked a school out in St. Louis, Missouri, and and started to learn chiropractic. And there I had a chiropractor, a doctor and professor, and he said that chiropractic can help 75% of 75% of people. And neither at the time I wanted to help everybody. So I started studying every chiropractic technique I could. I studied probably to date over 20, 25 chiropractic techniques. And after graduating, I studied a lot of more esoteric techniques in dealing with all sorts of energy work, mind body healing, emotional related stuff, and eventually created my own technique. And and from that, you know, I kept exploring, I kept learning, and a lot of times my clients were my research along with myself. Like I use myself as a guinea pig, but working with people as well. And I learned a lot. And so there was a time where I knew that structure wasn't the only key part because, you know, I got people better and some I didn't. And it was those people that I couldn't get better or took a long time to get better. I really wanted to I focused on them. And I noticed, well, I started to apply different things. So I tried like nutrition, was nutrition part of it. So, you know, I talked about cleanses and supplementation, and that didn't really move the needle. It helped, but didn't move the needle as much as I would have liked. And I started dipping my toe in emotional stuff. I got into Louise Hay and a lot of other people in a similar vein, and uh, I started clearing emotional things, and that's really the breakthrough that I started to have. And I should mention, there was a client that was really mm, impactful in this learning as well. He came to me. He could barely walk. He was crooked and tons of back pain, like extreme back pain. He walked out straight and without pain. He was just floored. He ended up referring like 50 people. It was crazy. And and the reason I'm saying that is because he came to me one day and he's like, "Look, Chris, I referred, him and her, and they don't have to see you anymore. Why do I have to keep coming back?" And at the time, he was coming every 4 to 6 weeks, where these people haven't seen him again. They got better, and I said to him, I said, like, "Look, you'll stop coming in when you retire." And what I didn't share here is that he knew to the day that he was going to retire. And I'm not saying, like, oh, it's going to be, in 96 days. It was like he was retiring in 492 days and 33 minutes and 6 seconds. Like he knew to the day. Like we're talking way ahead. And eventually he retired. And I didn't lie, he stopped coming in. And in about a year, less than a year, 10 months or so, he started coming back in again. And what I didn't share was he would come in with his wife. And I would hear them come in and they would be in the waiting room and they would bicker. And I would hear them bickering. And then they would come into the room, he'd bicker about her, and she'd come in and bicker about him. And the thing that happened after a year was she retired. So she's at home and new stress, right? I really caught on to like, wow, our everyday stress is impacting us. And so that really started to explore that. And and that kind of brought me to where I am today, fast forward today. But that was a biggest impact. And I started to apply that to my own life, like a lot of emotional stuff. But we'll kind of get into that in maybe a moment or two as well. So how does it all start? Well, here I am about 6 years old, and this is really when it starts an average. It can start anywhere between start. Well, you start creating stories, patterns. You start, well, really where it begins is in childhood. So anywhere between birth to, the research says anywhere between 8 to 10 years old. Um, and and really what happens, and we'll go over that, but it's really just where things start to happen where you can't complete the emotion. And so emotions will typically last, which I'll talk a little bit more about, is like 90 seconds. So if you have an emotion, you should express it and feel it and let it process, but we don't. We hold on to it, boom, and then it doesn't complete. Whether we're told to, you're not allowed to express yourself, you know, kids don't cry, whatever the story, boys don't cry, stop that, like simply because you were hurt by something, right? And so it really starts as childhood. And here I am, a 6-year-old Canadian boy playing some hockey, and that's the only one I had as a picture of me as a kid. But as you can see, life is amazing, the quote here, and then it's awful, and then it's amazing again. What happens to us in childhood often echoes throughout our lives. And that's the story, right? And so if it starts in childhood, and a lot of it doesn't have to be a capital T trauma. When I talk about trauma, it's trauma to you. It was trauma to your body. You didn't complete the cycle of the emotion, and your nervous system is holding on to it. And so uh it's a cycle that happens, and you're supposed to process the emotion. When you don't, it's stored, it holds on to it. So your nervous system hasn't processed it. So it's really now what we're going to show you is how to process that in your nervous system. And once you do that, you can actually let it go, and it's gone for good. And a lot of it starts, in childhood, but it doesn't have to be, like I said, a capital T. It could have been, you came home, your mom had a bad day at work. She comes home and screams at you because you dropped a pencil, or you spilled uh your tea, or whatever, that you spilled your whatever paint or something that's insignificant, but it was significant to her. We don't know our parents' story, and all of a sudden we made it mean like, oh, mom doesn't love me. It could have been I've had a client who's in around school, and she remembers the time, which is the craziest because I can't believe, like, we create this story based on childhood. So at a young age, I think she was in third grade, grade three, and it was around the time when there was a lot of dumb blonde jokes going on. And so in that time, she was blonde, and uh, either kids were making fun of her, or because she was blonde, or there's a lot of jokes around it that she made it mean like she must be dumb. And she created a learning disability that she had carried on for her most of her life, or at least into her adulthood. But it got her through college and all these things. So to her, it benefits her. So at some point, you have to let go of this story, right? And so she had to realize, like, it's not something you had your whole life. She remembers the time it actually started. So she created this pattern, right? And so we do that all the time. It could be a story around church or religion, right? We these are all beliefs that we start to create, and so they affect our nervous system. It could have been like you wanted a red bike and you got a blue bike, and at 30, it's not a big deal, but when you were 6, it was the biggest deal ever, right? And it's all these little micro things that happen that create these patterns, that disabilities that created our identity, which we'll kind of get into in a bit. And it doesn't have to be significant. It could be, I had a client who's a middle child. So the older son got to do everything with dad because he was older. There's 3 boys, so he could, mow the lawn and do like boy things at an older age. And then the youngest boy was mommy's little boy because, he's a newborn, needed more attention. And so the middle boy got lost. He wasn't able to like cut the grass and do the things with dad in the garage. And he was not around mom. So in essence, he was the mom was he felt unloved. And knowing the whole family, and he was probably the most loved, and his parents would even vouch for that. Yet it doesn't matter. He still feels unloved because of that, the story that he created in his mind, that he was not loved. And so these are specific examples. One that we not even know is a simple thing like, uh, which common is sleep training, or allowing your allowing your baby just to cry it out. Babies, the only way they can communicate is through crying. And so often we're taught just to let them cry or cry it out, or you don't want to deal with them now, whatever the story is, but they have an unmet need. It's either, they're hungry, they're wet, right? They poop themselves, or maybe they're not feeling safe, right? They've spent 9 months in mom's belly and all of a sudden they're out. So if you don't attend to that need, and we think, oh, it's spoiling them, but that's the only way they can communicate, a baby, right? And so when we don't, well, that then could mean like, uh, they're not lovable, it's unsafe, and then leads to some parent attachment style stuff, which you can learn lots about, but a lot of it starts from that early age. And those are just some examples, right? So it doesn't have to be, an abuse of some sort to create these stories, right? Like for instance, my story. So around this time, I was 6, 5 to 6. My parents used to tease me and my sister that they found me under a damp rock, or they found us under a damp rock. My sister thought it was funny. She laughed, and and we were, at the time struggling with mom and dad, and I remember like crying. I remember being really hurt by this. And there's no judging my parents. They did the best they can. This is a pattern that I created. My sister, it was funny to her. But I remember like pouting. I remember running away from home. And that was funnier for my parents. I took my little backpack, gray one backpack, like Spider-Man up the street. And I could only walk so far because we lived at a cul-de-sac, and then there was a busy street. So I got to the end of the street. I'm like, what do I do? Bring my pair of underwear and socks back, my little bag. My parents are laughing. And, I get it now. But in that moment, I created this story of rejection. And that carried through my whole life. And so up until my marriage ending. So I was married, and that ended, but that was like the biggest rejection of them all. I got the I love you, but I don't love you. And I realized like, oh, wow. And at first there's a lot of anger and, blame. But I realized like, look, I got to do what I do and teach. And so I started to look at myself, and I started to see the patterns of rejection. That was the first one. But then patterns in my life started to come up. And it wasn't like, because everyone says, oh yeah, I have a fear of rejection. Mine was deep. Like I was afraid, like if someone were to unsubscribe from my email list, like a total stranger, I felt like I said something that might have offended them. So I would reread the email, like what could I have said? If someone got, client would get better and they didn't come back, I might have felt like, what did I do wrong? You know, uh, Dating was a disaster because I mean, if someone were to date, they pretty much had to and I built like before kid, like I built like I watched the Secret, so I'd built this massive wall to protect myself to keep this identity, which we'll get into as well. But I kept that identity of this fear. I masked it so well that I had no idea. But I got cut from hockey teams. It was a disaster. I got, broken up to in university or in high school. And so after that, dating was like, well, I better not. Even a total stranger online, I wouldn't swipe right or left or like send a message to them because what if they rejected me? And if a girl made it obvious that she was interested and she pretty much had to bang me over the head and carry me away, then I was interested. And after 3 months would be my around my limit where either I'd break up or they'd break up with me because I'd be a total asshole. So, I gave them that reason to because I was fear of breaking up, but those are few and far between. And so, yeah, and so that was really my story of rejection, and that started at a childhood. And so, we all have these little things that happen to us in our life. So I'm not saying you have to remember, and you don't have to. The thing is that your body remembers, and that's the key. So maybe you've explored or know Bissell Van der Kolk. He wrote the Body Keeps Score, kind of a more popular book nowadays in around this work. And again, you don't have to remember it. So even like I've done some work myself, I don't remember where it happened. I just know that I use today as a reflection of what's happened, what I'm feeling, which we'll get into as well. And excuse me. And so that's really the idea is to remember through your body. So it really starts in your nervous system, and so we have your autonomic nervous system has two parts. It has a sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mechanism, right? This is what you're going to fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So these are some of the things we react to. So if we're triggered by something, and this system was great for when we, hundreds of years ago, where we hunted bear and we encountered animals where we had to be fearful of. And so you could either decide to fight the bear, you can flee the bear, or you can freeze, play dead, right? And worked good for our system. But nowadays we don't have that. We don't have that worry about a bear walking up into us, into the cities, right? So, but that system's still working. However, these new bears are these things that happen in our childhood. And so when the sympathetic nervous system is overregulated or dysregulated because of constant stimulus, because of different triggers, which we'll get into, it keeps firing. And when it keeps firing, then it's working 60, 70, 80% of your time where your parasympathetic, which actually will shut down, doesn't do any work. And that's in charge of like your sleeping, healing, digestion, anything that's done automatically. So if you're not using that system, because you can't use that system because if your sympathetic system is always firing, then you're not doing those things. And so that's really what I noticed with digestion. You can get as many cleanses as you want, and you can do digestive related things, supplementation. But if you're not getting to the root of the problem, again, then the digestion would come back, or you'd have to cleanse again. And that's what I was noticing in my practice with people. So, how does it happen? Well, just think about it. How many times have you gone from like just totally being fine on a regular day to complete chaos? You're driving to work, and all of a sudden someone cuts you off. Boom. You get up in the morning and then you stub your toe. Boom, right? Complete chaos. So it's simple things. Just think about it, right? So really what happens? So let's call up on my whiteboard here. And as you can see, the board. So in this system, really, a trigger happens, a stress of some sort. So a trigger, what's a trigger? A trigger is when uh, you remember back. So something might trigger could be a song on the radio. So say you broke up, a boyfriend broke up with you when you were in high school, and it was a big deal back then. And you cried and you saw him. And then after you broke up, you would see the car that maybe he'd rode, and you would look out and say, "Oh, is he in the car?" And then, that would fade away, but the story doesn't. So maybe when you were, on your way to, and he broke up with you, there's a song playing on the radio. Well, that's a trigger. And you may not notice, but your nervous system will remember. And so it starts to fire this again. Could have been like for myself, just the idea of like uh thinking about something like related to being fear of rejection. So maybe put myself out there to date or whatever that might have been back, back then or even now. There was a sense of rejection and it start to fire. So whatever that trigger might be, you get cut off driving a car, and people say, well, anyone would get angry with getting cut off. Well, not necessarily, right? Some people just drive and, great day and get cut off and let the people in, no problem. You're making it into a story. You're getting angry based on your trigger, based on something deeper than that. So it's never just someone cutting you off. If it was, it would be an emotion. An emotion would last 90 seconds. So if you're angry, so we're still human, we still have emotions, but emotions from a scientific point of view last 90 seconds. What that means is, if you get cut off, you get angry, you're angry for 90 seconds, it goes away. What happens then is really you create something around that trigger, then it keeps firing, which we'll get into. So you're triggered, your nervous system activates, so your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, which then you react to the stress, right? There should be deact. So your nervous system activates, but your sympathetic nervous system deactivates. So, and that should be your parasympathetic system should deactivate, and you react to the stress, right? So if you think about it, bear comes, and maybe that's a trigger, for instance. It activates your fight or flight. It deactivates your parasympathetic system, which does digestion, so they can't work, right? So you're not going to the bathroom. If you just think about it, if you're running from a bear, you don't stop to have to poo, right, or pee. That system shuts down. So you react in the stress. You might get emotional, but and then people say, well, you're not. People think you're broken or you're because it starts to loop, and you're not being too emotional, right? What happens is that it happens. So if it's just a normal situation, like you're angry because someone cut you off, 90 seconds, that should stop. The loop stops, right? However, what happens is we start to create a judgment or the story or a pattern comes up. There's a belief. So a judgment means you start to judge the driver or, whatever the story might be, and you're starting running your mind of what this person might be or doing to how could you do that? And you're judging them based on your driving and, whatever the story might come, it starts to loop. So then you get stuck in this loop system. And this loop system depends on the severity, but it could last, a couple of hours, some people a couple of days, weeks, right? And so when I first started to get into the work, if I got down or triggered by something, I would be down for days, weeks. And then, and then we don't know, we just get out of it. But I would work through it. Now the down moments are less. There's not big down moments or big dips like it used to be, right? Because my nervous system is much more regulated and balanced and calm. And that's really what happens when we're triggered. And so if we have all these triggers, so just to kind of close, our thoughts create our feelings create emotions, and the emotions will create our reaction. And so, how this all ties together is like all these triggers or stresses you might have, the stories you have, so lead to your identity. And so, if I were to picture you here, here's you, right? And I'm going to put a box around you. And we have a name for this. We call that our comfort zone, right? But it's really your identity. It's the identity of who you are. Identity. right? And so this is identity of who you are. And and what happens, so people, as soon as you get out of your comfort zone, what do you do? Go back. So it's actually part of your ego. This is your ego, right? It keeps you in this mode because it's safe. And these are your masks, right? Or your masks will be down here. So this is the masks you wear, right? So maybe you wear a mask like myself. I was more of a chameleon, like in order to fit in with everybody, I would wore a different mask. So, with the jocks, I wore a certain mask. With the nerds, I was, smart. And, there was, so knew everybody, I was friends with everybody, but not close to a lot of people because of the different masks. I didn't want to get people too close to me. Right. And so these are your patterns, right? Your patterns are part of this identity. Your beliefs are that make up this, right? Your beliefs, your judgments are part of that belief, right? So these are all there. Uh, uh, it kind of makes up your personality, your pattern stories are down here, right? Your stories that you create, that you're not lovable, that you're not good enough. Those are all stories that you create, right? And so, and this is what creates your identity. And I think it was what's his name? Neil Rogan. He created this. He called this actually your prisonality. Why? Because it keeps you in this prison. And so what we want to do and what happens is that if we go outside, our comfort zone is where the chaos is, right? There's chaos, and this is based on fear. You get nervousness, right? Out here, nervousness, anxious, so anxiety, so you're anxious, right? And so what do we do? Well, we revert back to our comfort zone. And so we never really move out of our identity because because we're not, when we're challenged, it gets fearful, chaos. So we're like, oh, it's not comfortable. I got to go back. And that in our ego, the masks we wear keep us stuck in this identity. And it's gotten you this far, absolutely, right? But you're much more than your identity. Once you realize like there's actually no box, right? And you can eliminate this box, you can collapse yourself. So how do you collapse that, right? How do you collapse this identity and create that new identity that we talked about? So maybe you want to have a better relationship with your family or your kids or your spouse, or maybe you want to have a better relationship with your boss or a career-based uh, improvement, more money or a raise. Maybe you want to let go of some old childhood stuff that's you're holding on to, that's keeping you stuck. And to maybe to get to a client, to an example, a client, and this is the craziest, it's hard to really grasp, but she is in constantly abusive relationships, or she was. So she's been in several, like 6 or 7 abusive relationships. And the craziest that we think, like, why do you want to be in that? Because it's comfort. This is your safety zone. It's your comfort zone. Even though abusive relationship, people are saying, why would you do that? To her, when she would move out into the chaos, she would have fear, nervousness, anxiety when she would date people that were better for her, right? And so that didn't feel safe for her. And so she would go back to this comfort zone because it's safe. It's, what do they say? It's better what you know than you don't know. It really happens because that's our ego thinking that keeps us safe. Remember I talked about our nervous system? We think like about a few slides back about like that's our nervous system's job, is to keep you safe. So it's really your ego, your masks you wear that with your nervous system all keep you safe in that zone. So until you're ready to like let go of that identity or collapse that identity, is really just um, collapsing that is realizing you have to. Yeah, I want to change that situation, and so that's how people, and the girl, my client, changed her situation. She wanted to stop dating abusive men, and that's why she reached out. That's why you even see people that marry someone, like I have a friend or kind of acquaintance now. he married someone and then eventually that marriage ended to only marry someone that was pretty much identical to the first marriage. He didn't learn any of the patterns. He ended up getting in the same situation, divorced again, right? Until you actually take ownership, you have to be responsible for who you are and what you create. Then you can make some changes, right? And what a lot of people do to make some changes is they kind of get into personal growth and goal setting and visualization and mind work stuff. Great stuff, right? But a lot of it's just surface level. And so we've all been to, or maybe haven't, but I've been to many workshops and personal growth seminars, and they rah, rah, rah up, and I'm like, wow, I feel awesome. And then, you know, I leave the workshop Sunday, and by Wednesday, I'm back to the same Chris I was before because you're not really working at the deep rooted stuff. Certainly, maybe I'm not entirely the same Chris, but I haven't really moved the needle. And like when you actually get to deeper stuff, you can actually learn to let go. Like for me, for instance, I um like I play hockey. So when I play hockey for fun, I was a pretty decent hockey player. This is, when I really came together with this work. And then um, when I moved to Mississauga, where I live, I was living up north near 4 hours from Toronto, and I was commuting down. This is where I met my future wife, or my past wife, I guess now. But and she lived here, and just worked out that I moved here. So I'm a Canadian kid. I played hockey, so I plugged into the hockey scene, and I joined a team. And when I played on a team, for whatever reason, I just couldn't figure it out. I was just like falling on the board, tripping over the blue line. I was falling all over the boards. It was just like uh, I couldn't understand it because when I play for fun, no problems. I'd score and be good, and then when I'd play in this league, so I had all these superstitions. Like I had to make sure, like it seemed like every other game I was good, so I would work these play for fun games around a league game, and where I'd make sure I put my right left sock on, my left pads on before my right. It was just all these crazy superstitions, thinking like, oh, this is what it was. And what I realized at the time, I was doing some work on myself, and then I realized on the way to a game, like I didn't had this sensation, and what it was anxiety. And story from my childhood, I don't really recall, but my body remembered. I was feeling anxious. I would pee 2 to 3 times before every game. And I started to work what I'm going to show you at the end of the session. And all of a sudden, the pain went away. And I continued and the anxiety went away. The anxiousness went, and I ended up tying our team in points coming from nothing. So, uh, that's kind of the work. There was a time, you know, to embarrass myself, but I'm cool with it. Is like my parents used to yell at me when I would spill water as a kid. And I grew up, and that's what I did with my child. And when I was married, that was how she must have grown up too, because it was just a normal practice we did. And then as a single dad, I'm yelling. I can see my daughter just fearful, and I'm like, "What am I doing? This is just water. This is ridiculous." And I did what I teach, which we're going to teach at the end. And after the very first time, it was just like night and day difference. Like I didn't yell at her. I got a little upset, but just she didn't notice it and yell and scream like I normally would. And by the third time, there's nothing. To this day, nothing. She spilled water a month ago for the first time in a couple of years. I didn't react. I'm like, yeah, we'll get to it after dinner. No worries. Right. And that's the the ability of this work. You have to get to the root of it. And so you have to actually make the unconscious conscious. And so what does that mean? I had to be aware that I'm doing those things. And that's really where the work starts. So we're going to get into that. So I'd love you to just take a look at some of these identities of like, what are some of your patterns? Like, what do you feel like if you were to label yourself? What to take a moment here and just pick a couple. I'd say pick, 10 if you can, circle 10 or pick 10. And if you have a hard time finding them, if you can't, have this little meme. Finally found the problem. And as you can see, he's pointing at the mirror. And what he's saying is that a lot of times look at the outside world. Who are you judging? What are you judging on those people? That tends to be your identity. For example, I had a friend who was going bald, and as you can see, I'm bald. But at the time, I was clinging to some scraps, and but I had more scraps than him, way more. I always had thin hair. I tried growing hair in high school, like everyone else was getting longer hair. Couldn't do it, right? So I knew that I never had a lot of hair, and so he would always ask, like, Chris, you're really going bald there? Like, man. He's like, what are you gonna do? And I said, John, I just saw you like last week. I'm like, I don't know, man. At some point, I'm just gonna shave my head. And that happened for like months, maybe even a year. And then finally, I said that, and he started shaving his head. And this has been almost 15 years. He's never once commented about my hair since that time. Why? Because it was never about my hair, right? So we always see the issues in other people, right? That's where I'm talking about the mirror. So, do you have 10 or so? I want you to pick three that really like if you were to imagine like that's me, 10 out of 10, circle those 10, those three. All right. So the process really is to work through something is you have to pause. So when you are triggered by something, right, we have to recognize I'm triggered. So we have to pause for a moment. And instead of going into the reaction mode of like your fight or flight, which we normally do. So just think if you were, if your boss says something to you or a spouse probably is even better, you're going to react. What's that reaction? You scream back, you get into defensive mode, you flee the situation, you fawn where you pause, like we went through those symptoms, right? Which one are you doing? You're doing one of those because you typically go into that fight or flight mode, typically, right? Unless you have that calm nervous system, but most times people don't, right? And they go into that system. And so what is it that you do, right? So we have to pause and recognize. And then it's becoming aware. Like, where are you feeling this in your body? Like, he said something to me and that activated, triggered me. What was that? So to me, trigger is a gift of something you haven't healed yet. So let's look at that. You could become aware. Where do you feel that in your body? Is it tense? Do you feel pressure? Do you feel sensation? And then bring some presence to it. Like, don't try to leave. Try breathe and feel into that sensations that you're feeling. And then you kind of get curious with it. Like, what is it trying to express in your body? Right? What is it saying to you? What is it? What do you, why is it there? Right? You can get curious. And then you want to feel those emotions, right? Most times we try to push them away, drop down. And so we'll often like use medication or drugs or work or porn or, alcohol to stuff those feelings down, smoke cigarettes, right? We stuff those emotions down. We actually want to feel those emotions. So feel the sensations. Just remember, like your body carries 4 times the messages to the body, to the brain, like from the body to the brain. So your body's sending more messages to your brain than your brain sends to the rest of your body. 4 times as many, right? So your body uh, has its livingness, but we don't feel our body. We're spend so much time in our heads, worrying about this or watching television, whatever it is we do, right? We want to bring our awareness into your body, and that's where the embodiment comes in. It's getting back in your body, getting a feel into your body, and in that way, you can then release it. Okay, and we're going to take you through a practice to do that. So, I just invite you to just get comfortable, find a comfortable position. And just start to just breathe naturally. There's no work you're doing, just breathing naturally. Just kind of allow yourself to kind of shake off the stress from today and just kind of naturally breathe. Know there's no work to do, you're just breathing. And I want you now just to kind of close your eyes and just allow the thoughts from today just to kind of drift and clear away. So bring your awareness to your body and your breath and just start to focus on your breath and just breathe through your mouth or nose, but I want you just to bring the breath a little bit deeper. So I want you to feel your chest rise and fall. And an exhalation, try to get that breath even deeper and feel your belly rise and fall. And try to get that breath even deeper, maybe down into your sacrum area, your coccyx where your tailbone is. Just try to get that breath deeper as you can and just start breathing out, trying to get these deep breaths in and out. So just going to breathe loving, healing energy in and breathe out any heaviness, density you feel in your body. Good. With each and every breath, you're just going to become more and more relaxed. So just start to feel yourself sink into your chair. Be Feel yourself sink into the mat, wherever you may be. Feel your back against the rest of the table or the chair where you are. Just maybe feel your shoulders sink more. Just notice your body getting heavier with each and every breath. Good. Now, I want you just to think of those three words that you really stood out to you, or even just one. You can do one at a time. Just bring that thought. Just start to notice when you think about that, where do you feel that in your body? And the second one and the third, just start to notice where do you feel that? Do you feel in your abdomen, your chest, your throat, or somewhere else in your body? Where do you feel that in your body? Maybe it's outside of your body. Start to notice. Do you feel sensation or heaviness, a density, maybe some feelings? Just keep breathing that loving, healing energy in and density, darkness out. You're not doing any work. You're just starting to notice. Notice any resistance you have to letting it go. And notice how that changes in your body. As you think of these, just maybe you have to remember and ask questions. You're going to get curious. Like, what are these trying to tell you? What is it that you need to work on or work through? Maybe there's a message. Maybe they're tied underneath some emotion that's there. Just feel those emotions that come up. But remember to breathe. The loving, healing energy in, density, darkness out. You're not doing any work. You're just breathing naturally and feeling. A lot of these feelings you've been holding on to for years, decades, centuries, and we're just going to let them go just by noticing, acknowledging, becoming aware. You haven't felt these in a long time, whatever that might be. You don't have to know the root. You just have to know the sensation that you're feeling in your body. Breathing in and out. Good. There's no work to do. You're just breathing in and out. Being curious. As you breathe in and out, it's just natural that things start to go completely, permanently, safely, and easily without effort. But there's no work you're doing. You're just acknowledging, being aware. Good. Keep breathing in and out, in and out. Good. There's no work to do. But as you start to notice, things start to clear and settle, and your body starts to calm naturally without effort. Starts to become more balanced inside. The heaviness, the density, the darkness just disappears. And all you have is love and energy. Just start to notice that love and energy, starting at your toes, working up to your feet, your calves, your hips, your abdomen, down through your torso, your arms, up to your neck. Good. Feel that calmness and balance. And when you're ready, open your eyes, feeling more refreshed and better than you did before. So just with time, we had to run through that short, but yeah, if you want to do that again and again, that's a great practice to work on. And I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you have any questions, feel free to follow along. And for a freebie, I have a freebie, and you can go to this prompt here or this website. It's a free prompt that'll help you work through some masks. So it's a deep dive. It's not it's not for the faint of heart. If you really want to do a deep dive on some of your identities and to let go, this is a great way to start that. And I want to thank you all for joining me and listening to this. Have a blessed night. Until next time. Bye for now.